This week we are marking Founders Day at C-SPAN. For 46 years, C-SPAN has been your unfiltered window into American democracy. Public service access like this is never guaranteed. As we look ahead, one thing is clear. It takes all of us. If you enjoy this C-SPAN podcast, please consider helping to fund a new era of C-SPAN. Donate at c-span.org/donate.
So therefore, the attack is on. Some journalists of the 60s are self-appointed keepers of the flame. They talk about our history and fight savagely those who would question it. But confronted with the crime of the century, with no motive and hardly any alleged perpetrators, they stand mute. Where in the last 20 years have we seen serious research from Tom Wicker, Dan Rather, Anthony Lewis, George Lardner, Ken Auchincloss into Lee Harvey Oswald movements in the months and years before November 22, 1963? Where have we seen any analysis of why Oswald, who many say adored Kennedy, alone among assassins in history, would not only deny his guilt but claim he was a patsy? Can one imagine John Wilkes Booth leaping to the stage of Ford's Theater, turning to the audience and shouting, "I didn't kill anyone, I'm just a patsy"? One might ask of the journalists who have suddenly emerged as the defenders of history, what is their sense of history? How much work has the sage of Bethesda, George Will, done in the 20 years he has been a columnist to try to uncover the answers to some of the dark secrets in Dallas 63? Will Tom Wicker and Dan Rather spend their retirement years examining closely the possibility of a second or a third gunman, or will they content themselves with savaging those who do?
Oliver Stone, the National Press Club, January 15th, 1992, defending his film JFK and going after reporters and historians who doubted his conspiracy theory-driven version of the Kennedy assassination. You might remember that clip. We played it 3 years ago. It was a March 2022 podcast marking the 30th anniversary of the movie JFK. That episode of C-SPAN's The Weekly featured only clips from Oliver Stone talking about JFK at the Press Club. Now, for this episode, something new.
Well, the movie JFK by Oliver Stone was a fraud. And I say that as the only surviving member of the Warren Commission. It was a case of distortion, inaccuracies, omissions, etc. Fortunately, most people looked upon it as a commercial movie production, not as a documentary.
That was former President Gerald Ford, also at the National Press Club, 1 year later, and speaking at the same podium as Oliver Stone. Today, the JFK assassination is back in the news. On the third day of his second administration, President Trump signed 6 executive orders. One was declassifying files pertaining to the assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, and Martin Luther King Jr. In preparation for the record's release, this episode of C-SPAN's The Weekly is a new twist on our original Oliver Stone JFK podcast. This time, instead of hearing Oliver Stone go after his detractors, we'll hear his detractors go after Oliver Stone. Actually, in fairness, let's give Oliver Stone the first word via his movie. JFK was released in theaters on December 20th, 1991. In its first week of release, JFK tied for 5th place in the U.S. box office with Beauty and the Beast. A month later, on January 22, 1992, the American University School of Communication held a panel called JFK the Movie, Cinema as History. They opened with 2 clips. Here's the first. You'll hear Michael Rooker as a fictional assistant district attorney named Bill Broussard, and Kevin Costner as real-life district attorney Jim Garrison.
We should be investigating our mafia leads here in New Orleans. Now, I can buy that a hell of a lot easier than I can the government. Ruby is all mob, knows Oswald, sets him up. Hoffa, Trafficante, Marcellus, they hire some guns to do Kennedy. And the government doesn't want to open up a whole can of worms there because it used the mob to try to get to Castro. You know, Castro being assassinated by the mob by us, it sounds pretty wild to junk you citizen. So they closed the book on JFK. Makes perfect sense to me.
I don't doubt their involvement, Bill, but at a lower level.
Oh, come on.
Could the mob change the parade route, Bill? Or eliminate the protection for the president? Could the mob send Oswald to Russia and get him back? Could the mob get the FBI, the CIA, and the Dallas police to make a mess of the investigation? I mean, could the mob get the Warren Commission appointed to cover it up? Could the mob wreck the autopsy? I mean, could the mob influence the national media to go to sleep? And since when has the mob used anything but 38s for hits up close? Mob wouldn't have the guts or the power for something of this magnitude. Assassins need payrolls, schedules, times, orders. This was a military-style ambush from start to finish. This was a coup d'etat with Lyndon Johnson waiting in the wings.
And a second clip, Kevin Costner again as Jim Garrison, this time sitting on a bench on the National Mall. He's with Donald Sutherland. He plays another fictional character, an anonymous high-ranking government official named Mr. X.
The cabinet was out of the country to get their perceptions out of the way. Troops were in the air for possible riot control. The telephones didn't work to keep the wrong stories from spreading if anything went wrong with the plan. Nothing was left to chance. He could not be allowed to escape alive. Well, I never thought things were the same after that. Vietnam started for real. There was an air of, I don't know, make-believe in the Pentagon and CIA. Those of us who'd been in secret ops since the beginning knew the Warren Commission was fiction. But there was something deeper, uglier. I knew Alan Dulles very well. I briefed him many a time in his house. But for the life of me, I still can't figure out why he was appointed to investigate Kennedy's death, the man who had fired him. Dulles, by the way, was General Wyeth's benefactor. I got out in '64, resigned my commission.
I never realized Kennedy was so dangerous to the establishment. Is that why?
Well, that's a real question, isn't it? Why? The how and the who is just scenery for the public. Oswald, Ruby, Cuba, the mafia. Keeps them guessing like some kind of parlor game, prevents them from asking the most important question, why? Why was Kennedy killed? Who benefited? Who has the power to cover it up? Who?
Now we'll hear from two people on that 1992 panel. First, Deputy Editorial Page Editor of the Washington Post, Stephen Rosenfeld. You'll hear Stephen Rosenfeld refer to panelist Colonel Prouty. That's Leroy Fletcher Prouty. He served as Chief of Special Operations in the Joint Chiefs of Staff under President Kennedy, and he was the inspiration for the movie's conspiracy character, Mr. X.
Along comes a movie producer who, as Pat Dowell says, gives us what she calls fragments of realities and a banquet of evidence. And yet, the film is a farrago, if I may use such a word, of truths and untruths, of the products of some realistic documentation and the products of a fevered imagination. When I realized I was going to have the privilege of hearing Colonel Prouty tonight, I said, aha, this will be my chance to see what really was going on in Oliver Stone's mind as he made this film, because surely Colonel Prouty, being familiar with the material, would have another view of it, because I couldn't understand how anyone in the film, Donald Sutherland, who was spinning together this mad web of circumstance, I didn't think that it had any coherence at all. Dramatic coherence, perhaps, but factual coherence, no.
Also on that panel, a congressman, Henry Gonzalez. On November 21st, 1963, Congressman Gonzalez hosted President Kennedy in San Antonio. Gonzalez accompanied Kennedy on the rest of the Texas trip through Houston and on to Dallas. On November 22nd, 1963, in Dallas, Representative Gonzalez was seated in the fifth car in President Kennedy's motorcade.
I haven't formulated any particular conspiratorial theory, because I believe that you have to adduce evidence more than rather vague circumstantial in order to establish any kind of a predicate that would lead to some kind of a formulation of an action of more than one person, which is a definition of a conspiracy. Now, I also will conclude by saying that perhaps I shouldn't be here because I haven't seen the film JFK, but I have seen some of the first films of this genre. Executive Action, for instance, was very much of this type. Conspiracy was implied, It wasn't as forthright as I understand this picture is, but it was understood that it was a JFK assassination.
Representative Gonzalez helped place Kennedy's casket in the hearse that transported him to Air Force One. In 1994, the Texas Democrat became the 5th recipient of the John F. Kennedy Profile in Courage Award. The movie caught the attention of another member of Congress. From June 1992, on the House floor, here's Republican from California, Bob Dornan.
Now here comes Stone's ugly statement, and this is typical of this man that pours acid literally into the thought processes of young people across this country. Oliver Stone says, quote, "The CIA is still there, and it has not gone away. It's the largest criminal organization in the world. It even exceeds the Catholic Church." Unquote. Bingo. This guy is sick. He says the Catholic Church is the most criminal organization in the world except for the Central Intelligence Agency. And this guy is a multimillionaire pumping out these propaganda films like JFK, the Born on the 4th of July, and the one I still call Spittoon that degrades the military service of our men and women in Vietnam.
Now Arthur Schlesinger. The acclaimed writer and historian served as special assistant to President Kennedy. Political historians and experts often incorporate the titles of Arthur Schlesinger's books in their own language, referring to the Imperial Presidency, the Vital Center, the Age of Jackson. Here's Arthur Schlesinger in a 1997 panel about Oliver Stone. And as you listen, be aware that also sitting on the panel is Oliver Stone.
History is constrained by fidelity to facts and documents. Fiction yields more to the claims of the imagination. Therefore, I do not contest the plea of dramatic license when historical novels, historical plays, or historical movies are under consideration. But dramatic license cannot be a blank check. It too must be constrained by fidelity to salient facts, that is, facts crucial to the development of the narrative, by fidelity to the spirit of the personalities and the times, and by refusal to abuse history by using it to ride theses unwarranted by facts and probabilities. As Oliver knows, I regarded his JFK as a deplorable exercise in the manipulation of history. The film's argument that Kennedy would not have Americanized the war in Vietnam seems to me wholly defensible. It has now been endorsed by Robert McNamara and McGeorge Bundy. The premise of the film, therefore, seemed to me fine. But the further argument that because of this, then LBJ, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the CIA, and the FBI conspired to have Kennedy murdered seemed to me atrocious. That is why in Mark Carnes' interview for the new edition of Past Imperfect, I suggested that he ask Oliver whether he really believes it happened this way, and if he has doubts, does he not feel some responsibility not to mislead the young? To which Oliver returned, I think, a rather dusty answer, restricting the conspiracy, I think, to 20 or 30 people. Now, Oliver Stone is a magician of montage. The technical virtuosity of his films is brilliant. The artful simulation, for example, in JFK, of gritty black and white camera work, which suggests it was taken contemporaneously. All this, I think, has an impact on the unwary young. You can never tell in JFK where fiction ended, where fact ended and fiction began. And I've been struck abroad by the extent to which the thesis of JFK seems to be accepted by young people as probably true.
Arlen Specter was a U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania for 30 years, and he was assistant counsel to the Warren Commission. In 2011, after leaving the Senate, Arlen Specter sat down for a series of oral history interviews. One topic, Oliver Stone and JFK.
I think it was a great public disservice to fictionalize the assassination and mislead so many people about what happened, and for Oliver Stone to do it in a deliberate manner. He spliced scenes. It was a Technicolor movie, and there were some scenes which were in black and white. My recollection is the scene about the stretcher with the bullet on it was in black and white, giving the impression that these were documentary shots, whereas they were not. And I saw an article recently that said 80% of the American people believe there was a conspiracy in the assassination. And Oliver Stone did a great deal to foment that. In fact, probably did the most to do that. And people have a responsibility when you make a movie, when you make a statement, when you make a speech, to be factual and to be responsible. And that movie was highly irresponsible.
Also in that oral interview, Arlen Specter discussed First Lady Jackie Kennedy and the Secret Service agent who came to her rescue, Clint Hill.
Mrs. Kennedy did not testify before the commission because the Chief Justice wanted to save her the experience, and it was a bad decision. She was the closest witness to the incident. She went back onto the trunk of the car, as shown by the famous Zapruder film. She was said to have remembered nothing about that. She was pushed back into the seat by Clint Hill, who Secret Service agent, who, notwithstanding carousing the night before until all hours of the morning, left the running board of the follow-up car, raced ahead, jumped on the car, pushed her into the back seat. But she should have been questioned.
Arlen Specter interviewed Clint Hill on behalf of the Warren Commission in March 1964. Note that Arlen Specter said Clint Hill was, in Specter's words, carousing the night before till all hours of the morning. Is that true? Was Clint Hill, in fact, carousing the night before till all hours of the morning? Here's a different account of what Clint Hill did the night before from Clint Hill.
The night before? Well, I'll tell you exactly what happened the night before. I'll tell you this. We left Washington that morning on November 21st, and we flew to San Antonio and were served a nice light lunch by Air Force One on the way to San Antonio. And we flew to Houston, and we flew to Fort Worth, and we didn't eat or do anything before we got to Fort Worth. We got to Fort Worth, we put President and Mrs. Kennedy in their suite, and I went off the floor around 1 o'clock, and I was hungry as hell. And I was tired. But I hadn't eaten anything since noon. So I went down in the lobby, and there were other agents with me, and Merriman Smith, who was the head of the White House press corps, was there. And he said, if you guys want to get something to eat, why don't you come with us? We're going over to the press club. So we went over to the press club where there was supposed to be food. There wasn't any food. They'd eaten it all up. So I had a drink myself when I was over there. And then they said there was a place down the street where they might have something to eat. We walked down there. They didn't have any food either. And so then I went back to my room. Went to bed. Placed a call to wake me up at 6 o'clock, ordered breakfast to be served in my room, which was consisted of eggs, bacon, potatoes, orange juice, toast, and coffee, if you wanted to know. And that's the only nourishment I had that whole night. There was no carousing, there was no partying. There were some guys like myself who were damn hungry.
That was from a 2013 talk about his book, 5 Days in November. Then Clint Hill talked about Oliver Stone and JFK.
That movie has caused more problems than anything I can remember because it is so full of just baloney. There are so many things in it that are just not true. And he really knows that. I happen to know one of the consultants that were working on the film. He happened to be a detective. And he went to Stone during the process of shooting that film and said, look, the things that you're putting in this movie aren't true. Stone said, I know that, but this is a movie. It doesn't matter. I'm making a movie. I'm not doing a documentary. And so he didn't care. And it was just full of erroneous information, and it's unfortunate because most of the young people that saw that movie at that time believed that that was true, and it was not.
Earlier this year, Clint Hill died. In 2010, he appeared on C-SPAN's Q&A program alongside Gerald Blaine. A former U.S. Secret Service agent, Gerald Blaine was assigned to President Kennedy and served throughout the entire JFK presidency. He resigned from the Secret Service in 1964. Here's what Gerald Blaine said on C-SPAN about Oliver Stone's JFK.
I went to see the movie JFK, and it was so absurd that I decided I was not going to read any more conspiracy tales.
Eric Hamburg is a former aide and speechwriter for Senator John Kerry and Representative Lee Hamilton. He also is a Hollywood writer and film producer. Eric Hamburg produced the Oliver Stone movies Nixon and Any Given Sunday, and he wrote a book called JFK, Nixon, Oliver Stone, and Me. During an appearance on C-SPAN's Book TV in 2002, Eric Hamburg discussed Lyndon Johnson's close aide, Jack Valenti.
He absolutely hated the movie JFK because he interpreted it, maybe rightly, maybe not, as blaming Lyndon Johnson for the assassination. And and that just infuriated him because he owed everything, his career, his life, to LBJ. He worshipped JFK, or LBJ rather. And so he refrained from attacking the movie until after it had been released and after it had made its money because, the Warner Brothers people leaned on him. But then he came out with these virulent attacks, and he wasn't the only one. I mean, the New York Times practically every day was running some attack. I mean, but Oliver sort of he produced a TV sort of miniseries called Wild Palms, where he did kind of a takeoff on Valenti, and they sort of made up, but I think they just both think that each other is a complete wacko.
Finally, we open with a member of the Warren Commission. Let's close with that same member. We return to the National Press Club on June 9th, 1993. Here again, picking up where we left off at the beginning of this podcast, Gerald Ford.
I hope and trust that it will be put on the shelf, and I hope that some other publications or news productions will give a more accurate picture of what transpired in Dallas when President Kennedy was assassinated. I still unequivocally, firmly believe in the two basic principles that the Warren Commission agreed to. Number one, Lee Harvey Oswald committed the assassination. And number two, the Warren Commission found no evidence of a conspiracy, foreign or domestic. Now, a lot of critics have come up, including Oliver Stone, but they haven't found any new, credible evidence. They've taken the evidence basically developed by the Warren Commission and speculated here and speculated there. So I can only get some relief in the fact that people are still writing conspiracy stories about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. So we'll probably have the same thing happening here 100 years from now.
Oh, by the way, a few years later, Gerald Ford was back at the National Press Club. And in 1996, again at the same podium where Oliver Stone stood in 1992, Gerald Ford was still talking about the movie JFK.
Can anyone dismiss the lessons of the past in anticipating the future? Like a legacy entrusted by one generation to the next, that past belongs to every American. It's not the exclusive property of the professional historian, nor is it the plaything of the Hollywood screenwriters. Back in the 1940s, the critic Edmund Wilson said, after reading Carl Sandburg's monumental biography of Abraham Lincoln, that Sandburg was the worst thing to happen to Abraham Lincoln since John Wilkes Booth. Lincoln never met Oliver Stone. I often think that the current movie rating system is inadequate to history, Hollywood style, along with GR and maybe X, and maybe we need a new category with the latter P for paranoid. Sadly, when it comes to cellular history, facts are often regarded as irrelevant, especially if they get in the way of conspiracies. Films like JFK and Nixon, we are told, should be seen as exercises of the imagination, wherein dramatic license outweighs literal accuracy. I say baloney. For in today's America, when so much of our public life is already confused with performance art, it's more important than ever that we not lose sight of reality. It's more important, and I re-emphasize it. Last week, we were all very moved, I was especially, to see a newly released film of President and Mrs. Kennedy in Dallas on that terrible day in November of 1963. It was far more touching, as well as more authentic than more recent commercial films about that tragic day. As the last surviving member of the Warren Commission, I feel an obligation to set the record straight. The history I took part in wasn't scripted by a screenwriter. It was very real. The people that I served with, including Chief Justice Warren, were not interested in suppressing the truth, but in uncovering it. Someone whose life has spanned most of this turbulent century, I also feel an obligation to young Americans, many of whom know nothing of recent events except what they see on a movie screen. According to one recent survey, a majority of American students cannot explain the Monroe Doctrine or the Marshall Plan, nor can they interpret the heroic actions behind the civil rights movement or the Western expansion. Don't get me wrong. I'm not urging censorship nor mindless celebration. I just happen to believe that our schools should teach the glories as well as the shortcomings of American history. Perhaps the crowning glory is the right of Oliver Stone to distort that history, to make a profit or make a political statement. And it's my right as an American citizen to call him to task for his distortions.
And now, a bonus clip. The movie JFK ended with a trailer that said, a congressional investigation from 1976 through 1979 found a probable conspiracy in the assassination of John F. Kennedy and recommended the Justice Department investigate further. As of 1991, the Justice Department has done nothing. The files of the House Select Committee on Assassinations are locked away until the year 2029. And the September 1998 final report of the Assassination Records Review Board said, the suspicions created by government secrecy eroded confidence in the truthfulness of federal agencies in general and damaged their credibility. Finally, frustrated by the lack of access and disturbed by the conclusion of Oliver Stone's JFK, Congress passed the President John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Collection Act of 1992, mandating the gathering and opening of all records concerned with the death of the president. And that takes us to January 23, 2025. Here's White House Staff Secretary Will Scharf and President Trump.
Lastly, sir, we have an executive order ordering the declassification of files relating to the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
That's a big one, huh? A lot of people are waiting for this for years, for decades. And everything will be revealed. Okay? Give that to RFK Jr.
Yes, sir.
And when everything is revealed, make sure you watch and listen to the C-SPAN networks for full coverage. Then go back and search for the revelations in the C-SPAN video library. That's it for this episode of C-SPAN's The Weekly. Thanks for listening and happy searching.